Kia ora koutou, and welcome back to the Early Childhood Seminar series. We're very pleased to be here with you and to share another Early Childhood Seminar, our final one for 2021. The focus of the seminar series this year has been on showcasing research of staff and students from the Faculty of Education and Social Work at the University of Auckland, and we're very excited to share with you the work they've been doing. Today, we're delighted to have with us Dr. Maria Cooper and Louise Gorst, presenting from their research studies on leadership in early childhood education and care contexts. The recording of this presentation will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel after the seminar. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please do use the Q&A function to ask them, and Maria and Louise will respond to the questions at the end of their presentation. Without further ado, I would like to pass over to Helen Hedges to introduce our guest speakers.
Kia ora, Justine. Tēnā koutou katoa. He aha te kai o te rangatira. He kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. The food of chiefs is dialogue. This whakatauki is appropriate for our seminar series, given you, the audience that we attract, those who are committed to ongoing learning and dialogue. However, it's also particularly apt for our seminar today, as our two speakers are both researchers of leadership in early childhood education, and their work, amongst other things, has identified that dialogue is critical to the work of leaders. These two researchers in our faculty have both won awards from the New Zealand Association for Research and Education for the theses that underpin the research they will present to you about today. So firstly, we're very proud of having such outstanding staff in our faculty, and secondly, you can be certain you're hearing about high quality research. Both Maria and Louise have held leadership positions in early childhood settings, and so came to teacher education with a wealth of practice-based knowledge and experience in teaching, leading, and mentoring of colleagues and student teachers. Maria Cooper has expertise in infant and toddler pedagogies, Pasifika children as learners, curriculum, assessment, and leadership. Maria holds a strong conviction that leadership potential is present in all teachers. She began her leadership research developing a concept she called everyday teacher leadership that she went to test out in two high-quality infant and toddler settings. Her analysis led her to a different conceptualisation, that of everyday collective leadership, reflecting more than just the team setting that teachers work in, but the qualities of collaboration and the conditions that support collaborative leadership. These include the core values that are the focus of her presentation today. Louise Gorst has expertise in curriculum, assessment, the arts, and leadership. Like Maria, Louise is aware of the possibilities embedded in everyday happenings in centres for informal leadership to be promoted and to flourish. However, many teachers balk at being called a leader or even a teacher leader. Louise's project explored ways that a leadership identity might be present or fostered. She presents on this to you today. Again, a reminder, as Justine has said, please put your questions into the Q&A as you think of them, and I'll draw on them in the discussion that follows the two presentations. Ngā mihi kia koroa, over to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Justine and Helen, and to Hayley behind the scenes. Mōri ora kia koutou tarowhalawa. Before I begin, I just want to set the scene for both of our presentations. For me, one of the biggest contradictions of leadership is that it is still seen as our answer to almost everything, yet it is one of the most misunderstood and under-resourced aspects of practice. Current national support we have for leadership in ECE sits inside our policy documents, such as the Teaching Council's leadership strategy, aimed at supporting the growth and development of leadership across the profession. We also have ERO's quality indicator framework, which places an expectation on ECE settings to ensure that leadership fosters collaboration and improvement. And we also have Te Whāriki, which is our curriculum framework first and foremost, but it does include suggestions about potential leadership practices. And yet, despite these initiatives and the growing leadership research base, to date, our sector has had little support to develop leadership understandings and practices in relation to these expectations and ideas that go beyond them. We hope that the ideas shared with you today will inform your understandings of leadership in some way and act as a prompt to think deeply about what leadership means in your own contexts, especially in these times of complexity and uncertainty. The title of my presentation, let me just get that up for you, Strengthening Our Core, reflects my belief that for teams or services to know where they're going and why, they need to articulate their essence, their being, their reason for coming together, specifically their values whakapapa. I explore this idea in my presentation by drawing on some of the key findings from my doctoral research on collective leadership to argue for cultures of leadership that are underpinned by core values and involve the collective. This, for me, is the work of leadership. In supporting student teachers over the years, I've made multiple visits to early childhood settings. My most vivid memories are of teams who've made me feel like a welcome guest, as if I already belong. But I also have memories of places where I felt like an unwelcome stranger, overlooked and having to find my own way to the student I was visiting. I've often wondered what these teams might say about what they do well or what they don't do well and need to collectively address. I've also wondered what might be said about the culture these teams are working within and the values that guide their actions. Experiences like these led me to investigate high-performing teams and the role that leadership plays in this. For a number of reasons, including our current pandemic, there has been a move towards more relational approaches to leadership in practice. This move is consistent with what the research evidence tells us, specifically that we can no longer rely on the individual leader to address all that needs to be addressed in education. The trouble is, a heroic view of the leader as the sole source of leadership is not only hard to attain, but it can discourage teachers from taking up leadership activity. Moreover, the demands of leadership in the 21st century are far too extensive for any one person. A focus on the collective rather than the individual can help reveal multiple sources of leadership, including the often under-recognized leadership capacities of those without positional leadership roles. Indeed, we know that for education settings to thrive, they need a community of leaders where both teachers and positional leaders work together to initiate and progress change. But this idea of leadership as a social collective phenomenon is not new. In the 1950s, social psychologist Gibb advanced the idea of leadership as a group quality to get us thinking beyond the dominant focus on the individual leader. From this view, leadership doesn't reside within an individual, but it is located in the interpersonal dynamics between team members. It also involves creating cultures that enable people to come together to collectively serve their community. To understand what the culture of a place encompasses, we need to look beyond the practices and explore the cultural norms and values that drive those practices. Doing so can help us identify our why, the motivations for doing what we do. It can also help us to support change that is sustainable rather than short-term and one-off. Hall's iceberg metaphor on the slide shows us that culture includes explicit dimensions, that is, those that sit above the surface, and implicit dimensions, those that sit beneath the surface. We can use the same metaphor to understand leadership as encompassing explicit aspects that sit above the surface, such as actions and tools, because they are tangible and directly observable, and also implicit aspects, such as values and identity, that sit below the surface because they are less tangible and more difficult to observe. Both explicit and implicit aspects are important to pay attention to when making sense of leadership. Hall's metaphor also suggests that if we want to understand the culture of a place, such as an ECE setting, then we need to spend time in the place and interact with those who are part of the place. Spending several months in my research centre helped me to identify core values as an important implicit aspect of leadership activity. Values, both individual and shared, are critical to leadership because they reflect who we are and they drive our behaviours, actions and interactions. Hence, leadership reflects a commitment to particular values and principles, some of which can move us towards collaborative endeavours, including shared reflection and deliberation. Values also provide an important gauge for us to reflect our practices against. As per the slide, values define what you stand for, and without values, an organisation lacks coherence and purpose. Kramer and Kramer warn, however, that values are meaningful only if people understand them. If they are vague or poorly communicated, they will not be real to people and therefore will not guide their behaviours and decisions. Focusing specifically on the values of a group can clarify how and why people within the group are motivated to adapt their practices in supporting the community. Because we draw on our values to guide our day-to-day practice and decision-making, I argue it is vital to make them explicit, to define them, and to understand how they drive our practices. And it's these ideas which inspired me to pay attention to the values that created the conditions for teachers' collective leadership in my study. My doctoral research was an in-depth case study of the nature of teacher leadership practices, perspectives, and underpinning conditions in a long-standing early childhood centre in Auckland. One of the research questions which I'm addressing in this presentation was what contextual conditions help to bring everyday collective leadership into being, where everyday collective leadership refers to the leadership activity of a teaching team. The study was carried out with 2 infant and toddler teaching teams within the centre, and the centre had a role of 100 children and employed over 30 teaching staff, mostly qualified. One reason for why the centre was selected was that it had a long-standing reputation as providing high-quality early childhood provision. This reputation was confirmed by several of their ERO evaluation reports. I was particularly interested in exploring what kinds of leadership activity involving teachers had led to this high-quality reputation. Participants included 16 teachers and leaders and 10 parents of the infants and toddlers. And I just want to say at this point that to this day, I continue to appreciate the generous contribution of each and every participant, including the amazing support of the centre director, the centre leaders, senior leaders, and the parent community. I generated data through focus groups with both teams. I carried out 5 months worth of observations of teaching practice in both rooms, 1-hour interviews with each of the 26 teachers, leaders and parents, and I also reviewed their centre documentation. I then analysed and theorised the data using concepts from leadership theory and cultural historical activity theory, which is also known as CHAT. CHAT's concept of activity helped me to see leadership as a social practice of a collective subject that has multiple components and divisions of labour, revolves around an orienting focus, involves the use of cultural tools, and evolves over time. This complex view of leadership meant also exploring some of the factors that underpinned team teaching and leadership activity in the setting. So what were some of the big ideas identified in my study? Teachers in both rooms were actively involved in leading aspects of practice alongside their positional leader peers, even when they didn't recognise their contributions as leadership. While the positional leaders had specific responsibilities, they encouraged their teacher peers without positional roles to step up to leadership in a range of ways. As you'll see on the slide, teachers and positional leaders collectively led in a range of ways, such as when running the room, sharing knowledge and expertise in different situations, supporting one another as and when needed, collectively enhancing teaching and learning through whole team inquiry cycles, making decisions on behalf of the group during joint practice, challenging ideas during team dialogues, and sharing evidence about practice with colleagues and parents. I also noted that positional leaders who were qualified teachers played a significant role in establishing the culture and conditions that encourage teachers to collectively enact leadership in these ways. However, it was still everybody's responsibility to sustain the culture and the conditions, even when things did not go well. Overall, I felt a strong sense of togetherness where teachers and positional leaders enacted shared autonomy to try things out and problem solve as a collective, while still allowing for individuality to be expressed. So drawing on the work of Joe Raylan, these leaderful ways of being were endorsed by the explicit support of the centre leaders. Many participants described these senior leaders as being visible and approachable to all staff. I also observed this in practice. They regularly visited rooms to check in about how things were going, took on teaching roles as and when needed, promoted external and internal professional learning opportunities, and paid for study fees. Parents in both rooms also noticed these highly collaborative and supportive ways of being in both rooms. For example, parent Serena expressed that teachers are always reading the situation, whether one of the other teachers needs help to do a task or watch other children while that person does a task. And parent Shona commented on the positive climate by saying, "I feel very welcome and I feel the warmth here. It's not a cold, sterile environment. There is easy laughter and caring words, interest and inclusion." Okay, so through deeper analysis, I was able to identify 6 core values that underpinned the joint activity of both teaching teams. These values were congeniality, collegiality, relational trust, and as you'll see on the next slide, manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, and power with relationships. Congeniality and collegiality were identified in team dynamics and in many of the teacher-leader-parent interactions. Congeniality describes a warm and friendly environment where colleagues are welcoming and get along with one another. A step up from this is collegiality, which describes colleagues talking at length about their practice, sharing knowledge and ideas, giving and receiving feedback, and supporting one another as and when needed. Both congenial and collegial interactions were apparent in the practice of both rooms. For example, interactions were characterised by friendliness, humour, warmth, as well as offering and receiving support and feedback on practice and knowledge sharing. Parents also describe their interactions with teachers and leaders as feeling welcomed and cared for. In addition to these values, high levels of relational trust were found to underpin the interactive practices of both teams. This trust appeared to give teachers the confidence to willingly take up leadership opportunities. Burke and Snyder's concept of relational trust in schools endorses the link between trusting relationships and a well-functioning educational service. In my study, relational trust was apparent when teachers and leaders listened to and valued the input of one another, shared their knowledge and expertise during meetings to address their shared concerns. The Māori concepts of whanaungatanga and manaakitanga were also values seen to underpin interactions in both rooms. Whanaungatanga is about building relationships through deep connections based on shared experiences and collaborating in ways that afford a sense of belonging. Manaakitanga is about approaching others with respect, hospitality, and care. The presence of these values was evident when teachers and leaders referred to their colleagues as being like family, and they felt well supported by them. They also valued their relationships with parents and welcomed the idea of parents spending as much time in the centre as they wished. In turn, parents described teaching teams in very similar ways and described the centre as their family and their second home. In one case, a parent described the teaching team as her child's 5 mums. The final value underpinning joint activity was power with relationships between positional leaders and teachers. Both positional leaders and teachers described and were seen in many situations to approach their work as equals. These power with relationships encourage teachers to see themselves as co-leading in an enabling and empowering environment. For example, teachers were invited by positional leaders to take on leadership responsibilities of their choosing and to make pedagogical decisions on behalf of the team. The presence of these 6 core values was consistent with the centre's norms and rules that were written into their staff handbook and philosophy statement. This meant there was strong alignment between what staff espoused or said they did and what they actually did in practice. Overall, these values reflected some of the conditions that promoted that strong sense of togetherness that participants and I experienced in the setting. They also supported the emergence of a culture of collective leadership involving teachers and positional leaders. To me, these findings are significant as they highlight that establishing core values based on bringing people together with respect, care, and mutual empowerment can help foster the collective enactment of leadership amongst teachers and leaders. So with these research insights in mind, how might we begin to cultivate a culture of values-driven leadership in our ECE settings? First, it is important to understand that informal and formal approaches to leadership often coexist in practice. This means accepting that leadership is more than a position of authority. It is also about a social collective practice that those without a leadership title can and do contribute to and collectively enact for the broader benefit of the community. Second, time is needed to discuss, share and negotiate on the values that underpin practices in the setting and ways that these values might be sustained in ongoing everyday practice with children, colleagues and families. As part of this point, teachers and positional leaders need to ensure there are multiple ways to contribute ideas, such as during staff meetings, by email or other, just to ensure that everyone gets to have a say. And third, everyone needs to be clear on the agreed upon core values so that these values can become embedded as collective expectations, not just nice to haves in a document on the wall. To support leadership, enactment and development in the sector then, I now offer these questions that teachers and leaders might reflect on individually and collectively in relation to the cultures in which they work. 1, what shared values underpin the teaching and leadership practices in your setting, and how do you define those values? 2, how do you live and embody your shared values in ongoing everyday ways? And 3, how do your values foster a sense of togetherness and collective action towards enhancing learning, teaching and well-being for children, self and others? Alongside these questions, I also encourage teams and services to consider ways they can advocate or continue to advocate for broader leadership support from their leaders, managers, and or our policy makers. This will ensure that all ECE teams are well set up to serve children and families in their communities. To conclude then, creating a culture of values-driven leadership is one way to strengthen our core to achieve our bigger purpose. But this doesn't happen overnight. Nurturing such a culture requires time, knowledge, commitment, and collective action. Importantly, articulating and embodying a set of core values that are sensitive to the local context and that bring people together is important leadership work needed in these times and for all other times to come. So now that we have explored core values as an important implicit aspect of leadership, we're now going to hear from Louise Gorst, who will address another implicit aspect of leadership, this being the leader identity of teachers. Tēnā koutou katoa and nau mai, haere mai, Louise.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Maria. My name is Louise Gorst. I teach and research on early childhood education at the University of Auckland. I have been involved in ECE for over 20 years in various settings and roles such as teacher, leader, head teacher, and centre manager. The title of my presentation today is Looking Through a New Lens, Experiences that Foster Teacher-Leader Identity. My presentation today stems from some of the findings reported in my qualitative study in New Zealand. The topic of my study was leadership and leader identity. The title of my research is, it is so open-ended. Teachers' views, perceptions, and experiences of leadership and leader identity in early childhood education. My study explored 6 early childhood teachers' views, perceptions, and experiences of educational leadership and their leader identity. Data were obtained from 2 settings, each with 1 focus group with the teaching team, an individual interview with each teacher, and analysis of centre documentation. The findings and conclusions were based on a thematic analysis. I would like to thank the participants of my study. They gave their time and commitment. Thank you. So what led me to my study, and why is leadership and leader identity important to look at? Over time, I have found myself reflecting on my own personal and professional experiences of leadership. Through recent postgraduate study, I began to unravel why and how I viewed leadership in the way that I do. Reflections on my own experiences of leadership provoked my interest to pursue research in this area. My initial experiences of leadership in ECE influenced my view of leadership throughout my career. I was often put off the idea of being a leader by observing the cumbersome duties and responsibilities for those in positional leadership roles, often being the person who told everyone what to do and being responsible for driving the team. These early observations and experience were often from leaders who led from the top down, using hierarchical leadership practices. At the time, I knew these practices didn't sit right with me, but it wasn't until I was lucky enough to be part of a team where leadership was shared and we all got to contribute our ideas and take on leadership responsibilities. It was then that I began to think about leadership differently, and I started to see myself as having leadership qualities. I also remember being a new graduate where I inherited several unwanted leadership roles. I had no idea how to lead, and I didn't know what effective leadership looked like. And more importantly, what I knew about leadership in ECE was based on what I had observed and experienced. And sometimes these were not necessarily the best practices. So what motivated my study? Teachers in ECE are expected to demonstrate leadership practice, but there is little support available for them to learn about leadership and negotiate and develop their leader identity. Teachers have the potential to embrace multiple identities, such as teacher, colleague, and leader. Maria Cooper's study revealed that navigating a dual teacher-leader identity is a complex process that requires a collaborative and supportive context. What we know is that teachers who have opportunities to informally lead and recognise their own leadership actions can potentially embrace their leader selves. However, many teachers do not recognise ways they engage in leadership activity, and nor do many identify themselves as everyday teacher leaders, despite often enacting an informal leadership in a range of ways. As mentioned in Cooper's and Sinha and Hanushkin's study, examples of this can be leading an aspect of a team or centre review or teaching and learning, and also supporting other colleagues and student teachers. These interests of mine and my leadership experiences, the expectations I have seen placed on teachers, and the gaps in the literature that I have identified all signal an urgent need for further research on this topic, which led me to my master's research. So, what were my research questions? The overarching question is, what are teachers' views, perceptions, and experiences of educational leadership and leader identity? To support my investigation, the following questions were developed after reviewing the literature. What are ECE's teachers' views around the types of leadership practice they have experienced? What are ECE teachers' perceptions of themselves as leaders? And what knowledge and experience might support ECE teachers to negotiate and develop their own leader identity? There are three key concepts based on my research that I will elaborate on with you today. Teacher leaders. These are teachers who lead through enacting leadership roles, duties, and responsibilities alongside their role as a teacher. Leader identity are teachers' perceptions of themselves as leaders in relation to their own leadership practice. And informal leadership is where teachers take on leadership roles, duties, and responsibilities, but do so without a positional leadership role or title. So, why is my study significant, and what did my study find? Firstly, viewing leadership knowledge and understanding as a complex notion. Implications for teachers and leaders in ECE include understanding leadership as a diverse and unique practice. Secondly, teachers had positive perceptions of themselves as teacher leaders, and with positive support and encouragement, they enjoyed leading in various areas. Teachers' construction of a leader identity and their enactment of leadership practice is dependent on the environment and the people around them. Thirdly, positive and professional relationships were viewed as significant factors in supporting leader identity. Positional leaders have a significant, influential role on the development of teachers' leader identity. And fourthly, teachers embrace learning on the job as a preferred way of developing their own leader identity and learning leadership knowledge, skills, and practice. Leaders and teachers valued learning on the job rather than relying on set and prescribed leadership frameworks. So overall, these findings acknowledge the significant role that those supportive positional leaders play in establishing an environment conducive to teacher leadership practice and teachers constructing a positive leader identity. So, based on some of my findings, the question that I will answer today is, what experiences might foster teachers to negotiate and develop their teacher leader identity? Looking through a new lens may enable teachers to negotiate and develop their dual roles as a teacher and a leader in order to embrace their dual identity. First and foremost, my study revealed that while not all teachers recognise their own actions as leadership, teachers with positive experiences of leadership have positive perceptions of themselves as teacher leaders. And with support and encouragement from their positional leaders and their colleagues, they enjoyed leading aspects of practice. The following slides will unpack findings based on the experiences that may assist ECE teachers to negotiate and develop their teacher leader identity. Firstly, having a supportive and collaborative context. Secondly, being delegated, invited, and encouraged to lead. And thirdly, having leadership practices recognised. Okay, so the first finding revealed having a supportive and collaborative context may assist ECE teachers to negotiate a dual teacher leader identity. Having supportive leaders and colleagues influenced some of the teachers in my study to feel positive about embracing their leader identity. One of the teachers, Millie, commented on the importance of a leader knowing the people in the team to better support them. It's like figuring out who everyone is. You've got to have knowledge about people, and that I think is a really strong one. Understanding who is in your team and then figuring out how to best support them in their role. The ideas of leaders fostering a collaborative environment where everyone was encouraged to contribute was seen to empower the teachers in my study through having a voice and a sense of belonging. One of the teachers, Sally, shared, they, effective leaders, are open to others' perspectives and they give and show respect to the people that they are involved in, the opportunity to go off and weave your own little thing, and that teachers are trusted to do that, and that your ideas are valued. The teachers in my study also noted that having a leader who did not promote working collaboratively as a team stifled their own productivity and the team's goals. They described how a lack of positive and professional communication and collaboration amongst the team did not support a sense of belonging or a culture of shared roles. Some of the teachers' negative experiences were about leaders who had a controlling manner and made all of the decisions on teachers' behalf without consulting or collaborating with them. This was an idea from Booker and Cummings' research about the dark side of leadership, where leaders who misuse their power and control by not promoting a collective and shared approach. And this did not give teachers opportunities to develop and enhance their leadership and their leader identity. These shared experiences suggest that teachers may need positional leaders to support their enactment of leadership by stepping in during collaborative learning and supporting them. Another consideration is that while both settings of my study had a supportive and collaborative culture, this may not be the case for other settings where there might be possible tensions and complexities. Overall, a supportive and collaborative context can empower everyone to feel that they are a valued team member. And through contributing as a team, teachers can potentially embrace leadership roles and responsibilities by looking through a new lens so they can see themselves as a teacher and a teacher leader. The second finding identified that both settings in my study included leaders who encouraged teachers to experience a range of roles and responsibilities through the sharing and respectful delegations of tasks and duties, which the teachers also embraced. Also, inviting and encouraging teachers to lead in areas based on their own strengths, interests, and passions. The teachers in my study view delegated roles and responsibilities as opportunities to develop and enhance their leadership skills and practices, and how these also promoted the acquisition of new knowledge and skills, enabling a sense of capability and competence. One of the participants, Katrina, had an empowering experience where she was encouraged to share her knowledge and expertise. My boss wanted me to be the head teacher of the under twos, so I felt quite empowered and was able to lead. And I guess settling children into daycare was something I felt was one of my strengths. Another participant, Emily, also shared her thoughts on the word leadership. When I hear the word leadership in ECE, I usually will always think about kotahitanga, so collaboration, that kind of thing where everybody takes on a part of the leadership based on their strength or their passion or something that they want to grow. In contrast, teachers reflected on negative experiences where they were given unwanted leadership roles due to feeling out of their depth, having no support, and a lack of experience or expertise. These experiences led to some teachers' hesitancy to take on similar roles and responsibilities in the future. These ideas indicate the importance of leaders knowing their team well and tapping into them, but it also raises the importance for teachers and leaders to have knowledge and experience of the enactment of collected, shared, or distributed leadership. Georgia shared a positive experience where a leader delegated roles and responsibilities according to teachers' strengths. It's all about knowing your team and where their skills lie, because we've all got different skills. So you can delegate and give people things that play to their strengths. It's nice to play to your strengths and for these to be acknowledged. Overall, being delegated, invited, and encouraged to lead in areas of strengths, interests, and passions with support was seen to encourage teachers to negotiate and develop a dual teacher-leader identity. Again, this is heavily influenced by the actions and practices of positional leaders. The third finding revealed having leadership practices recognised supported teachers to see themselves leading effectively, strengthening their leadership capabilities and development of their teacher-leader identity. My study revealed that all teachers felt valued and appreciated when their leadership roles and responsibilities were recognised through acknowledgement and praise from their leaders and colleagues. Examples in my study were how teachers felt valued and appreciated when they received feedback for some of the areas that they led. One of these was where Lisa received positive recognition for the work she had done in leading the Centre's bicultural program. The things that make me feel really good is when you get recognised for the work that you're doing. I think a lot of it's through verbal, with meetings with management, through staff meetings, and through appraisal systems. Katrina also found it rewarding and motivating to get positive feedback from her leader, peers, and whānau when she was leading the children's settling in process in her room. I had a purpose and I was doing a good job and I was being recognised for it. In terms of teacher leader identity, being recognised as a leader was empowering for the teachers in my study. ECE literature on leadership emphasises the importance of a supportive environment to enable the construction of teachers' leader identity. Maria Cooper reveals how teachers gain a sense of empowerment when they are supported by formal leaders to engage in collegial experiences as a team, through openly expressing and sharing their ideas and expertise and leading relational dialogues. Teachers in my study acknowledged and praised each other's strengths and skills in the focus groups. This collegial recognition and support encouraged teachers to identify the areas in which they led and supported others. This finding emphasises the importance of experienced leaders creating supportive conditions and opportunities to invite and support teachers to take on leadership practices and to acknowledge and celebrate these. In summary, receiving recognition and feedback was viewed as an important factor in the development of teachers' leader identity, as it promoted a sense of empowerment and confidence in their own leadership potential. The common thread here, yet again, is the influential role positional leaders have in the ways they support teachers to negotiate and develop a dual teacher leader identity. So what? My study argues that teachers' construction of a teacher leader identity and their enactment of leadership practice is dependent on the environment and the people around them, in particular, positional leaders. Looking through a new lens may enable teachers to develop and negotiate their teacher leader identity, where they may potentially see themselves as having two roles, one as a teacher and one as a teacher leader. My study has also shown how teachers' views and perceptions of leadership are informed by what they experience and observe. For teachers to look through a new lens, they need a supportive and collaborative context, delegation, invitations and encouragement to lead, and for their leadership practices to be recognised. So now that I've answered my question for today, what are some of the implications for leadership practice and policy? My study endorses important implications for teacher leadership practice and teacher leader identity. First, teachers who have not had positive experiences of leadership may need support to reframe their views of leadership in order to embrace leadership as part of their everyday practice. Additionally, the concern that some teachers may not recognise their own actions as leadership emphasises the need for teachers and leaders to consider the diverse range of informal leadership practices that are possible. Understanding leadership practice and leader identity is an essential aspect of teaching and learning in ECE. When the teachers in my study were given time to think about their own lived experiences of leadership and leader identity, they were able to think about different ways these occur. So recognition of the effects of negative leadership and leader experiences raises the need for knowledge and support to be given to all leaders and teachers in ECE. The recently developed leadership framework and strategies from the Teaching Council had their own implications. The generalistic nature of these being applicable to the whole sector, including but not specific to ECE, seems insufficient in relation to supporting ECE teachers and leaders, given the diverse and unique context of ECE settings. My study highlights that more support is needed to understand what leadership means in relation to teachers' everyday practice. My study also highlights the importance of recognising implications for leader identity, which is currently not mentioned in the leadership strategy. Instead, the strategy places emphasis on the practices and the role of leadership, with little regard for how it can be influenced by people and settings. Emphasising leader identity and leadership policy documentation is needed, as the development of leader identity and ways it develops over time were identified as significant factors in enabling teachers to see themselves as leaders and to enact teacher leadership strongly influenced by the people and the settings teachers experience. So, based on my study, I encourage teachers and leaders to reflect on the following questions. How does your team embrace teachers and leaders' strengths, interests, and passions? How does your team collaborate and share roles, duties, and responsibilities? And how does your team recognise and celebrate leadership practices and actions? Kia ora. Thank you for listening to my presentation today.
Kia ora kōrua. What thought-provoking presentations we've had this afternoon, and so many examples of different leadership activities, but also the really important supportive conditions and the encouragement that needs to happen for leaders. So we've got time, I think, for one question for each of you. And Louise, I'm actually going to come to you first. And just to ask you, if it's possible, and just thinking back on your own career and your development, can you pinpoint a particular time where you felt that you embraced a leader identity as part of that dual teacher leader identity, and how your own experience then has matched the findings of your study?
Good question, Helen. The first part of your question is when I was part of a team where we were encouraged to focus on our strengths, interests, and passions, and each teacher had their own skill set, and we supported our children's interests in our planning, our program planning around based on that. And again, that would have been, I'm trying to think how many years ago that was, I won't add that up, but it's similar again, it's still there where teachers do feel more comfortable to lead in areas that they feel confident and capable in leading, rather than, you know, being delegated or given something that's out of their comfort zone where you feel you don't have the expertise. So I'm very passionate about teachers having positive experiences of leadership, and often they can stem from things that we feel that we've got some good knowledge and experience with sharing.
So that does match some of the findings that you've talked about today, and I know that's a topic you're interested in exploring further. So yeah, thank you very much. Maria, coming to you, both of you talked about those leadership activities and practices, and you both talked about everyday teacher leadership, but then for you, what came out of it was the idea of the collective and collaborative leadership. So again, just a pinpointing moment, just wondered if you could tell us all, you know, what was the moment that you were able to pinpoint this shift from everyday teacher leadership to collective leadership? Was it something that you observed in your field work? Was it something that came clear when you really began to analyse? You know, just tell us. What was that pivotal moment for you?
I think it started, thank you, Helen. It started when I was a leader in ECE, just kind of, you know, impressions of, I can't do this on my own. I was the one given the title, and I realised that one day we had a dialogue with the teaching team, and it was about who would be interested in taking on different responsibilities, things that they were really keen on leading in. And that moment made me realise there's so much richness in a team, and to place a lot of the responsibility on one person is actually inadequate for leadership to take place. And then the second moment was in my study. I actually went into it in my doctoral study looking at teacher leadership, and a lot of the literature on teacher leadership looks at individual leaders. So teachers, and it's because a lot of the literature is based in schools. So you've got a lot of teachers who work in their own classrooms and who may influence the school from their own classrooms and being part of other classes. But I realised in ECE, a lot of what we do is is collaborative, and even within a team, you may have people who are not, you know, don't agree with certain things, but there's work to be done in how we can kind of come to some agreement that this is where we're going to move. And again, it came back to the collective. I just could not see teacher leadership in isolation from what was happening within the team itself, because as Louise has said, people lift you up. It's people who support you, and it's the conditions that are established and maintained by the people that hold these ways of being and allow them to evolve. So yeah, two places, two examples there.
Yeah, thank you. And given the values that you've talked about and the findings that you've shared, could you comment on, we've had a question about ways teachers might be supported in areas they don't feel quite so comfortable in. So as part of that kind of team ethos, what would be your recommendations, Maria, for how they might be supported?
One of the threads that came out of my study was this need for personal work. So people will bring their own experiences and sometimes baggage to their work of teaching and leadership. And where is the space in our services to engage with some of those things to enable them to move forward? So when someone when someone is hesitant to engage in a certain practice or to take on a certain responsibility, first I'd want to know why that person has been kind of chosen to take on those activities, and second, what is their hesitation about? Where does that come from? And I think effective leaders who are not just in the positional roles, but people around us, more established teachers, for example, and what Louise said, those who know their colleagues well will be able to pick up and have those dialogues with people to just unravel what's going on here and how we might move through this together.
Thank you. And just coming back to you, Louise, you talked about your own experience of taking on leadership positions way too early in your career, and we did for a while in early childhood due to policy, of course. It meant that happened for a lot of teachers. I just wondered, what would be your advice to our new graduates who are about to go out into settings and are currently undertaking interviews? How do you think that you can suss out in a short time, like a visit or even in an interview, the kind of environment that might be supportive of them developing the teacher leader identity? Do you have any thoughts on that for them?
That is a good question. I guess first and foremost would be the philosophy of the centre, and asking questions about how some of those, I talked about those roles and responsibilities and tasks and duties, And I think it's great when you're in an interview and you're the interviewee to ask some questions as well and find out, ask questions about program planning. How are these roles distributed? Does everyone have a turn at taking on various roles and responsibilities, and asking about leadership? And the other thing to consider too is that every setting is completely different in how their leadership is set up, not just different terms, but sometimes there can be a centre manager, then a team leader, then a room leader. Yeah. So it's finding out about all of those, the sort of structural, those conditions.
Yes, and that's something, you know, you've both talked about. It's that difference, your iceberg metaphor, Maria, between the, you know, what's happening for a positional sort of structural approach to leadership and what's happening amongst the collective and the opportunities that are there. So yes, thank you very much. I'll just hand back to Justine now to close the seminar.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Maria and Louise, for the presentation of your research this evening. You've reminded us that fostering teacher-leader identity is a complex yet everyday process that requires a collaborative and supportive context and a culture of values-driven collective leadership. So ngā mihi nui kia korua. We hope everyone watching has found this seminar thought-provoking and that it has provided inspiration for your own practice and thinking about leadership in early childhood contexts. I'd like to conclude by thanking everyone who has been involved in our early childhood seminar series this year, our wonderful presenters, our support team here at the Faculty of Education and Social Work, Grace Jones and Craig Berry, and my two seminar series co-hosts Helen Hedges and Hayley Chan. A huge thank you also to everyone who has attended the seminars this year. We're looking forward to sharing more seminars with you in 2022, beginning in February. In the meantime, we wish you all a joyful, safe and restful holiday season and summer. Kia kaha, kia ora, kia atawhai, ka kite anō.